Chapter 36. She breaks. The silence of the penthouse had transitioned from a vacuum to a tomb. I stood in the center of my office, the floor littered with the glass shards of the phone I'd shattered an hour ago. The words of Leo Mercer were a repeating loop in my brain, a digital ghost that refused to be exorcised. She's gone, Alexander. And this time, even you don't have enough money to buy her back. I had been a fool. I had played the same game my father played, the same game my mother played. I had thought that if I could control the perimeter, I could control the outcome. I had treated the woman I loved like a high-value asset in a hostile takeover, securing her in a vault in Camo, thinking that safe was a substitute for respected. Yes, sir. Marcus's voice came from the doorway, hesitant and thin. The security team in Camo, they've found the boat. It was abandoned 2 miles down the shore. There's no sign of a struggle, but they found this in the water near the dock. He stepped forward, his hand shaking as he held out a small, waterproof evidence bag. I didn't need to look. I knew what it was, but I took it anyway. The charred platinum band, the ring that had survived an explosion, a kidnapping, and a corporate war, was now just a piece of metal at the bottom of a plastic bag. She had thrown it away. She hadn't just left the villa, she had left me. The trackers. I rasped, my voice sounding like it was being dragged over gravel. Disabled, sir. Every piece of hardware we gave her was left on the nightstand. She used the clinic's backup server to bypass our firewall. She didn't just run, Alexander. She deleted herself. I felt a surge of something that wasn't rage. It was a cold, paralyzing terror. I had spent my life building walls to keep the world out, and in my arrogance, I had built one that finally kept her out, too. "Find Leo Mercer," I commanded, my eyes turning to the dark Manhattan skyline. "I don't care if you have to buy the clinic he works in or the house he lives in. I want him in front of me. Now." "Sir, he's already gone. He checked out of his hotel in Zurich 3 hours ago. We believe he's with her." The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the obsidian desk to keep from falling. I had given her to him. By locking her in that villa, by choosing control over her heart, I had driven her straight into the arms of the one man she knew would never cage her. The steward was dead. The Titan was a lie. I was just a man standing in a glass tower, realizing that I had finally achieved the ultimate Blackwood victory. I owned everything, and I had absolutely nothing. "Get the jet ready," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "We're going to Camo. And Marcus." "Yes, sir." "If we don't find her, don't bother coming back. None of us are." Maya POV. The safe house smelled of damp stone and old smoke. It was a small, inconspicuous cottage tucked into the dense forest above the lake, far from the glittering villas of the elite. There were no marble floors here. No high-speed satellite links. Just a flickering fire in the hearth and the sound of the wind howling through the cypress trees. I sat at a wooden table, my hands wrapped around a mug of bitter tea. Opposite me, Julian Vane was staring at a laptop, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. He looked different than the man I'd seen in the boardroom, haggard, desperate, and dangerous. "The transfer is still locked, Maya," Vane said, his voice a low hiss. "You said you had the synchronization key. If I don't see the Sterling files on my server in the next 10 minutes, our partnership is going to get very unpleasant." "The key is in my head, Julian," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I felt numb. A heavy, freezing layer of ice had settled over my soul the moment I watched that villa disappear from the back of the boat. "And the only way you're getting it is if I see the proof." "Proof of what?" "Proof that Alexander is suffering. I want to see the news. I want to see the Blackwood stock hit the floor. I want to see him realize that the steward has lost the only room that mattered." Vane let out a short, bark-like laugh. "You're more like him than you think, the same hunger for the kill, the same need for total destruction." I flinched, more like him. I looked at my bare hand, the skin where the ring had been feeling strangely sensitive. I had broken. That was the truth I couldn't admit to Vane. I hadn't come to him because I believed in his cause. I had come to him because Alexander had finally crushed the last piece of my spirit. He had used my own safety as a weapon to silence my voice. He had turned our love back into a contract, and in response, I was turning my father's legacy into a weapon. "Here," Vane said, turning the laptop toward me. "Look at the ticker. Blackwood Industries is in freefall. The incapacity story is being replaced by the murder-suicide theory. The board is eating itself. By morning, Alexander Blackwood won't have enough capital to buy a subway token." I looked at the numbers, the red lines, the chaos. I expected to feel a surge of triumph. I expected to feel the fire of Act II returning to warm me, but I felt nothing. Just a hollow, aching black hole where my heart used to be. I was watching the man I loved be dismantled by the world, and all I could think about was the way he had looked at me in the warehouse when he thought I was dead. "I've got you," he had whispered. "It's over." But it wasn't over. It was just starting. The door to the cottage opened, and Leo Mercer walked in. He looked at me, then at Vane, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "The perimeter is clear," Leo said. "Blackwood's ghosts are scouring the shoreline, but they won't find this place. We're ghosts now, Maya, just like your father was." "Is it done?" I asked, looking at Leo. "The Mercer-Thorne alliance is being finalized as we speak. With the Sterling IP as our collateral, we'll be the new primary contractors for the Zurich Summit. You're not the Sterling girl anymore, Maya. You're the architect of the new era." He walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch felt like a lead weight. I looked at him, the man who had been my Uncle Leo, the man who had betrayed my father, and the man I was now using to destroy the man I loved. And in that moment, I finally broke. Not with a scream, not with tears, but with the realization that I had become the very monster I had been running from since the gala. I had traded Alexander's gilded cage for a basement full of shadows. I had used the science of the human soul to facilitate a corporate assassination. "I can't do it," I whispered. Vane froze. Leo's grip on my shoulder tightened. "What did you say?" Vane asked, his voice turning lethal. "I can't give you the key." I stood up, the chair falling backward with a crash. "You're no better than Arthur Blackwood. You're no better than Eris. You're all just vultures waiting for the fire to go out so you can pick at the bones." "Maya, don't be a fool," Leo said, his voice dropping to a warning low. "Alexander Blackwood is finished. If you don't stay with us, you have nothing. No father, no money, no future." "I'd rather have nothing than be a part of this," I said, my voice gaining strength. I lunged for the laptop, wanting to smash it, but Vane was faster. He grabbed my arm, twisting it behind my back with a violence that made me gasp. He shoved me against the stone wall, his face inches from mine. "You think this is a game, Sterling? You think you can just walk away from me after you've let me see the back doors to the Blackwood servers?" He pulled a small, silver cylinder from his pocket, a neural inhibitor. "If you won't give me the key willingly, I'll take it. The same way your father did, one neuron at a time." I looked into his eyes and saw the true face of the fallout. It wasn't about love or betrayal. It was about the cold, hard reality of power. I had broken the cage, only to realize I was standing in a slaughterhouse. Alexander POV, Como, 4 a.m. The rain was a deluge now, turning the hills around Lake Como into a landscape of mud and shadow. I stood on the dock of the abandoned boat, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the mist. My security team was moving through the woods, their voices echoing in the distance, but I stayed by the water. I was looking at the spot where the ring had been found. "She didn't just throw it, sir," Russo said, stepping up beside me. He looked exhausted, his tactical gear soaked. "She placed it, on the piling, like she wanted us to find it, like she was leaving a breadcrumb." I looked at the piling. A small, flat wooden surface. If she had wanted to discard me, she would have thrown it into the middle of the lake. But she had left it where it could be seen. She wasn't running away. She was running to a confrontation. "Where is the nearest high-bandwidth uplink in this area?" I asked, my mind suddenly firing with the old strategic clarity. "There's an old weather station on the ridge, sir, and a few private villas with dedicated lines." "No, not a villa. She needs somewhere she can't be tracked by my mother's lawyers or the board. Somewhere Vane would feel comfortable." I pulled out my tablet and pulled up the topographical map of the region. I looked for the blind spots, the areas where the cell signal was weak but the landline infrastructure was still solid. And then I saw it. The Thorne Estate Annex. A small property heiress Thorne had bought in the 90s and then forgotten about. "There," I pointed to a tiny speck on the ridge. "That's where they are." "Sir, that's a fortress, if Vane is there." "I don't care if the devil himself is there," I growled, walking back toward the SUV. "The fallout ends tonight. And this time, I'm not bringing a contract. I'm bringing a hammer." We drove up the winding mountain road, the tires skidding on the wet leaves. My heart was a hammer in my chest, a rhythmic, violent beat of hope and fury. I knew she was there. I could feel her. The tether between us hadn't been broken. It had just been stretched to its absolute limit. We reached the gates of the cottage. They were locked, but I didn't stop. I rammed the SUV through the iron bars, the sound of shattering metal echoing through the trees. I was out of the car before the engine stopped. I didn't wait for my team. I ran toward the cottage, my handgun in my hand, my eyes fixed on the single light burning in the window. I burst through the door, my shoulder hitting the wood with the force of a battering ram. The room was a chaos of shadows and flickering firelight. I saw Vane, I saw Leo, and then I saw Maya. She was slumped against the wall, her face pale, a silver electrode attached to her temple. Vane was standing over her, his thumb on the trigger of a neural inhibitor. "Alexander," Maya whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "Drop it, Vane," I roared, leveling my weapon at his chest. One more step, and she becomes a vegetable Blackwood. Vane shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "I have nothing left. I've lost my company, my name, my life. But I'm not leaving without the science." "The science is dead," I said, taking a slow step forward. I didn't look at the gun, I looked at Maya. "Look at her, Vane. She's not an asset. She's the woman who just dismantled my entire empire with a single boat ride. Do you really think you can control a woman who can do that?" Leo Mercer stepped forward, his hands raised. "Alexander, stop. We can still settle this. We can merge the interests." "There are no interests left, Leo," I hissed. "There is only her and me, and the fact that I am going to kill you both if you don't move away from her." I saw the moment Vane's resolve broke. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. He lunged for the trigger, his eyes wild. I didn't think. I fired. The bullet hit the laptop on the table, the screen exploding in a shower of sparks and glass. The neural inhibitor hummed once and then went dark, its power source fried. I was across the room in a blur. I tackled Vane, my fists moving in a rhythmic, violent blur. I didn't see a rival. I didn't see a businessman. I saw the person who had tried to take the light from her eyes. I would have killed him right there, on the floor of that damp cottage, if I hadn't heard her voice. "Alexander, please." I stopped. My hand was raised, ready for a final strike. I looked at Maya. She had managed to pull the electrode from her temple. She was shaking, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and love. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't let him take that from you, too." I let go of Vane. He slumped to the floor, coughing and gasping for air. I stood up, my breathing heavy, my hands shaking. I walked to Maya and knelt beside her. I didn't touch her, not yet. I was afraid that if I touched her, she would realize how much of a monster I really was. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, Maya. I chose control. I chose the cage, I thought." "I know what you thought," she said, her voice breaking. She reached out and took my hand, her fingers interlacing with mine. "You thought you were saving me, but I didn't need a savior. I needed a partner." "I'm here now," I said, the tears finally falling. "I'm here, and I'm never letting go again." "No more cages?" she asked, a weak smile touching her lips. "No more cages. From now on, the only room I want to own is the one you're in." Maya POV. The police arrived 10 minutes later. Vane and Leo were led away in chains. The safe house was swarmed by Swiss authorities and Blackwood security. The fallout was finally being contained. But as Alexander and I sat on the back of the SUV, wrapped in a single, heavy blanket, the world felt very quiet. The rain had turned into a soft mist, the lake below a dark, peaceful mirror. "You threw it away," Alexander said softly, looking at my hand. "I had to," I said. "I had to show you that the ring didn't matter if the woman wearing it wasn't free." "I found it," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out the waterproof bag and handed it to me. I looked at the charred band. It was ugly. It was ruined. It was a reminder of every mistake we had made. "I don't want it back," I said, handing the bag back to him. Alexander looked surprised. "You don't?" "No, I want a new one. One that isn't built on a contract or an explosion. I want one that we pick out together, in a shop that doesn't know who we are." Alexander smiled, a real, genuine smile that made his eyes crinkle. "Deal." He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, deep, healing kiss that tasted of the future. The break was over. We had hit the bottom of the fallout, and we were still standing. "Act I is almost finished, Maya," he whispered against my lips. "Good, because I'm ready for the next one." "And what's that?" "The claim," I said, my eyes flashing with that familiar, beautiful fire. "The part where we show the world that you can't lock in a storm. You can only learn how to dance in it." Alexander POV, midnight. We returned to the hotel suite in Zurich. The media was still a roar outside, but we ignored it. We spent the night in each other's arms, not talking about the board or the science, but just listening to the sound of each other's breathing. I looked at the Vigil of Justice notebook on the nightstand. I picked it up, and on the 20th page, I wrote a single sentence. "She broke the cage, and in doing so, she saved the man inside." I lay back down and pulled Maya closer. She was asleep, her head on my chest, her hand in mine. The fallout was settling. The world was beginning to move on. But as the first light of dawn touched the Alps, I realized that I would never be the same. I was no longer the man who owned the room. I was the man who had been conquered by the woman in it. And as I leaned down to kiss her forehead, I realized that was the best deal I'd ever made. Maya POV, end of chapter 36. I woke up to the sound of the birds. The sun was shining over Zurich, a brilliant, cold gold. Alexander was standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the light. He looked like the man I had first met, the ruthless billionaire. But as he turned and saw me, the mask vanished. "Good morning, partner," he said, his voice a low, warm melody. "Good morning, Alexander." I sat up, the sheet falling to my waist. "Is it over?" "The fallout, yes, the trials. They start tomorrow, the board. They've offered me the chairmanship back." "And?" "I told them to talk to the CEO," he said, a slow, dark smile spreading across his face. "And who is that?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "You, Maya." "I've officially transferred the controlling interest of the Blackwood Sterling Group to you. I'm just the consultant." I stared at him. "You gave me the whole company." "I told you, Maya, I'm not the boss anymore. I'm the man who follows the storm." I laughed, a rich, happy sound that filled the room. I stood up and walked toward him, my bare feet silent on the carpet. I stepped into his space and reached up, taking his face in my hands. "Well, Mr. Consultant," I whispered, "I have a first order of business." "And what's that?" "I want you to take me to breakfast, and then I want you to take me home." "To the penthouse." "No," I said, looking into his eyes. "To the room where the lights are always on." Alexander pulled me into a kiss, a long, deep promise of a life that was finally ours to write. We were locked in. But for the first time, we were the ones who held the key, and the world was ours to explore, together. Next chapter, Chapter 37, Distance.